Thank you. My name is Herman Warren. I work for The Economist. I have two questions and a comment. One, given the kind of average wage levels that were eloquently articulated, the high unemployment rate in the narrow sense, which is around 28%, it would, on the face of it, seem that unions would be more relevant than ever. And yet, union membership, as I understand it, is declining. So why is that? And what is it about the approach and perhaps the message that unions have adopted that may need to change, given this disconnect? That's one comment. The other comment / question relates to, Lyle, your submission around muscle memory. The last time we experienced high growth rates was 50 years ago, and the days of high growth are over. So I think there's an orthodoxy and perhaps a false connection between growth and employment, because many high growth nations are small economies with very high unemployment, putting aside perhaps China, maybe India. But in the African context, 9 out of the fastest growing economies, the 20 fastest growing economies in the world are here. Tanzania would be there, Cote d'Ivoire would be there, Kenya might be there, and so on and so forth, but you have very high levels of unemployment. So to me, growth is not the solution to unemployment. And yet, when you look at developed economies that have very low growth rates, some of them are at or near full employment, Japan being a classic case. So what is it, given that high growth is gone, but high unemployment isn't? And we need to figure out how we get better employment and better equality in an environment where there's low growth. So what's the answer for South Africa? Then Iraj, to you, I guess it's more of a comment. We're all in the same boat. But unfortunately, I think many in leadership, on all sides, but particularly, and maybe it's unfair, but nonetheless, it's my subjective comment, in the political leadership are not only willing to go down with the ship, but to plug holes in it. Right, so it's a crisis. Yeah, but there are positive things, but how do we get out of this? Because we have a president who's willing to shuffle his cabinet, and he couldn't know that that wouldn't have repercussions. We have cabinet ministers who'll say they'll just pick things up when they fall, and that credit ratings don't matter.
Yep.
And yet the fastest growing portion of the budget is servicing debt that's going to get more expensive. A panelist indicated that the tax base is going down. What do you do to service 17, putting aside infrastructure investments in education, safety and security, so on and so forth, what do you do when the numbers don't balance? Because eventually, stuff hits the fan. And it's not like, hey, we didn't know that this crisis was going to come. It happened in the United States. These are own goals.
Thank you so much, panelists. My name is Patrick Ache. I'm into business development. So from my perspective, I was wondering where the private sector's contribution can come in, because Comrade Beki, you mentioned things that speak to perhaps the population of the employed right now, which is still the minority. Raising wages, perhaps, would be the short-term answer. But in between that, and maybe the long-term measures that need to be taken, which I don't know what you suggest, because 16 to 17 million people, some apparently permanently unemployable. Now, what do we do, to bring them? You were asked a question around employability, Comrade. You did not suggest any answers to that. Given some of the educational policies, 30% pass marks, how do we remedy not just the current situation, but future generations of, what can you be employed in on a 30% pass mark? So I also wanted to then bring in, between the short-term, maybe wage increases, long-term employability factors, what can we do to create business at the bottom of the pyramid right now, to encourage businesses that's from those unemployables, because they're not going to be employed in the formal economy. What is being done to create business, to foster business in that? And what are your thoughts on employability also in the long term as well? Thanks.
Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Sipho Mahalema. I actually want to pose this question to COSATU because I see COSATU only protecting the employed by sitting by sitting with the bargaining as a big union and a big corporate to set up the minimum wage that excludes us as the small businesses. So in that way, they are the part together with the big corporates to create barriers of entry of small businesses. And then the other part that I want to raise is on the Black Industrialist Program that is seemed to exclude the small businesses, specifically the black, especially in townships, because I think it's ridiculous to say black businesses needs to have the minimum of 10 million to be part of Black Industrialist Program. And then on the part of transformation, I think it's silly of the big corporates to only transform in sector specific. I'll give you an example. When you look at the financial sector, they only transform on the financial where they have black CEO, black management in the financial expertise. But if you look at their whole procurement processes, they don't employ black businesses probably who runs the cleaning part in the Standard Bank. They are not black businesses. If you look, the people who are doing the maintenances, they are not black businesses. So I think the traditional big corporates, and then also they are not willing to take part in transforming the society. Thank you.
Wendy Dobson from Standard Bank. We can chat over a drink. But in previous jobs, I worked at NEDLAC and at the Department of Trade and Industry. And I've been in the room of social dialogue in these different capacities, in presidential job summits, growth and development summits. And it strikes me that one of the reasons these things have all failed is that business never sacrifices anything, never puts anything on the table. It always expects everyone else to make compromises and to sacrifice. You know, trade unions, people who earn 3,500 Rand a month must accept labor market flexibility. Government must put more money in X. The community sector must do this. But what does business put on the table? And what's business put on the table that affects how it makes its money, not how it takes its profits and puts some of its profits into bursary schemes or painting schools? So I think that fundamentally has driven this deep lack of trust between social partners and led to the erosion of social dialogue in South Africa as something that can solve our problems. So I think one of my questions is what should be business, what should corporates, let's not put small business in this, because I think it's particularly an issue of our top corporates. What can they do that's meaningful, that's also symbolic, that will show a sense of social solidarity in South Africa and help build trust? Could it be something like a massive employee share ownership program? Not the tiny little things we've seen up to now, but something really substantial, something that really then would change the figures around direct black ownership in our economy. So that's one thing. And then the second thing is, because this is all about the role of the private sector, so we're focusing on that. But we know the recipe for growth, the conventional recipes. We know the doing good business industry, things, and we know the investment climate factors and the things that drive productivity. We know those recipes. We've known them for 20 years, but we've not been able to implement them because the obstacles are political and they're structural, and because we haven't been able to get, for want of a better term, which I don't like, economic codesa, the social compact. And I think partly, I'd like your thoughts on the fact that that's because business retreated from the political arena once they got gear. So they thought they'd won the battle. They'd got the independent Reserve Bank, they'd got inflation targeting, and so on. So they withdrew. What COSATU then was almost forced to do was to engage politically, because that was how they were going to protect their members, was through influencing policy. Business didn't think it had to influence policy post-gear. So I'm really interested in your thoughts on what is the appropriate political role of the private sector at this point in time.
I've worked quite a bit with people in the mining sector, especially your executives of mining companies and that, and they will tell you that you find this almost stubborn resistance to transformation and to doing anything meaningful socially. And they tell you, we employed X number of jobs, we bring X amount of foreign exchange to South Africa, and we pay X amount of tax. So please don't bother us, leave us alone. We already are doing our fair share. I'm not sure if you've come across that.
Too often.
Perhaps we'll start with you, Lion.
Sure. Well, my question, it was really just Herman's question around the big growth question. And I do agree, yeah, we are firmly entrenched, as we said, in the low growth paradigm, and we need to think about the world very, very differently. I don't fully agree with the way that, I suppose growth doesn't just translate into employment. I think we can all come to terms with that, but we do need growth. Growth is a prerequisite for some form of employment and development. But it's how we manage that growth. And if you look at this last period, this last boom period, especially in the African context, and I think let's delve into that a little bit, because that's what we really look at, is during that boom period, between 2002 and 2012, Africa enjoyed the fastest growth period on record. But did they put in place the right institutions, the right mechanisms to create employment opportunities, invest in the right areas of productivity in those economies? There might be one or two examples, or there might be very, very isolated cases, but by and large, most of these countries didn't. By and large, we didn't do that during our mediocre growth period in South Africa either. And that's probably why. And what you're really asking for, or what you're asking about around this growth question, is the same question that everybody else is asking, is around inclusive growth. That's what you're kind of alluding to. And I would suggest then that growth is a prerequisite. I haven't done the numbers and I haven't looked at the correlations between growth, but I would actually argue, perhaps, if you look at the entire kind of universe of countries around the world, and the growth periods that dating back the last 5 or 6 decades, which is the more accurate period of time to measure that growth, looking at the fastest growing economies, those being over that period of time being South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, and those, they've nearly got full employment in those countries. So I'm not suggesting that we have to replicate those, and that, by the way, is another little problem or little rabbit hole that we're disappearing down here when we refer to the developmental state. Can you believe that those countries, we often reference them as developmental states, but believe me, when they entered into those models of development, they didn't call themselves the developmental state. That's the benefit of hindsight or that they had. But what I'm saying is that growth is a prerequisite, but it's how you use it. And it's mostly around creating the right institutions and the right mechanisms, and investing in the productive sectors, and investing in the private sector to allow for that. And I take Wendy's point as well around these indices and things, and just a very, very quick point around the political role of the private sector. It's quite simple, actually. You're a vested stakeholder in the entire system, so you have to have a voice, and you have to have a very, very strong voice, especially in the context of South Africa, where we are unlike most other countries around the world, where the market capitalization of our stock exchange is over 300% of our GDP. There are very few countries around the world that have that, and that's what we kind of have to leverage when we engage as a stakeholder in the system here in this context.
May I just latch on that? Is that Warren? Mr. Herman Warren. The fact is, growth is not static. Technology moves. Opportunities disappear, opportunities appear and emerge. As we sit here, the technology is changing the way we do business. And we mustn't fool ourselves. I just finished a study 2 weeks ago, just looking at the full spectrum of countries, the countries that have been the beneficiaries of automation, fourth industrial revolution, whatever you want to call it, and countries that have been losers. And interesting enough, in both groups, there are developed countries and there are developing countries. So it's even this notion of you are developed and you are underdeveloped, you are emerging, you are submerging, all of that is really good for branding. It's not real. We need to look at the fact that growth at any point in time means using opportunities that with the existing technology, not with the old technology, creates new opportunities. Now, if we look at that space, over the past 11 years, our comrades on the left and on the right and in the center, they've watched 4 ministers have come and gone, and South Africa's ICT policy still not changed. And all the same ministers have gone to Davos at my cost and at your cost to come back and talk about it was fantastic fourth industrial revolution. But what are you going to do about it? Nothing. It means nothing because it's not about, they don't connect the reality that if you want to grow, you cannot grow the old ways. $100 million of investment today in whatever sector of your choice will create a fraction, a very small fraction of the number of jobs the same amount would have created 20 years ago. Let me give you a practical example. From January next year, in Mokopane, not far from here, there will be the first mine in South Africa that will have no human being in it. Not unskilled, no skilled, no white, no black. Entirely automated. That mine, with that level of investment, a mere 10 years ago, would have created 55,000 jobs, of which 80% would have been semi-skilled and employed from South Africa and the region, and the rest would have been highly skilled people. From January next year, the same amount of investment, but the number of jobs that will be created in the same 50,000, 55,000 would be 275, of which there will be none even skilled. They will be super skilled. They will be driving the entire drone system from their air-conditioned rooms, not close to the mine. They don't have to be there. Is my message clear? Why aren't we growing? Because our policies are reactive. We're still negotiating in our NEDLACs about things of the past, not things of the future. In our health sector, in our education sector, in our ICT sector, there are opportunities that we lose out and the youth are missing out. In our universities, we are not teaching them those skills. We're talking about analyzing why they don't get jobs, but what we are not enabling them to get the job. And the discourse in the society, even in our NEDLAC, is not about how to make our education system, our human resource system, resilient enough to unlock the capabilities. And the sad part of it is here, that the very time that our black majority has the capacity and the capability to empower itself, our regulators are standing in their way, including NEDLAC, including this multi-stakeholder chit-chat that they do. Because it's chit-chat. It's not, show me one of them. I've been sat in many of them. Right? It is chit-chat with zero intended commitment. That's the problem.